month 13, I finally remember waking up one morning and feeling happy and feeling gratitude that I woke up. And I remember thinking, I don't know the last time I felt this way, um, because the depression was just so crushing that I almost didn't survive it. And that's when I knew that I had finally really healed, and that this was everything that I had been needing all along, was just safety and love and understanding, um, and belief in myself.
Welcome, everybody. I'd like to introduce Amy to the show. Welcome, Amy.
Hi, thank you.
So let's get right to it. I was just looking at your symptom list here so everybody can see. That's just page one. I think there's 18 pages. No, just joking. It's a lot. And you know what? I went through these symptoms and I probably had 90% of these.
They're very
It's
common.
interesting. Yeah. It just, I didn't have a name for them because I didn't know, right? Like now that I look, when I talk to some people, they're like, yeah, it's called triple PDL or CMPBL, right? And I'm like, yeah, what is that? And they go, I had this. And I'm like, I had that. I didn't even know that's what it's called. So interesting.
Mhm.
So tell us about your perfect storm. What happened? What were your symptoms?
Okay, yes. So I would say truly a lot of it started at birth for me. There's a lot of generational trauma, a lot of genetic predisposition, I would
Mhm.
say, to develop chronic illness. But for me, it really started with pregnancy of my daughter. That was kind of where I had had symptoms throughout my childhood and teen years, but I did not recognize it as debilitating or chronic illness until pregnancy. And so the pregnancy that I had was extremely difficult. And I
Mm.
really just never recovered after that. I ended up having to have a C-section, and I just never felt strong and healthy after that. Um, I was bedridden most of my pregnancy,
Mhm.
hospitalized a few times, very sick. And then my daughter was born with very significant health problems. So we kind of immediately spiraled into survival mode, grief, surgeries, doctors.
Mm.
And I would say it was probably I think it was when she was 3, almost 4, my body finally just said, I'm done, no more.
Yeah.
And I became almost unable to function on any kind of normalcy level. I had been struggling for years, fatigue, laid on the couch a lot, but I was still showing up. I was still trying as best as I could, but eventually it turned into bedridden, wheelchair bound most of the time, and just fell apart at that point. So I
So
was
before,
probably 23 or 24 when that happened.
okay. So when you were before you had the pregnancy, let's
Mhm.
go back a little bit.
Okay.
How was your childhood and your relationship with your parents? How was that like?
Complicated now, looking back. At the time, it seemed very normal.
Mm.
Um, I I had so my dad was undiagnosed neurodivergence, and my mom had a lot of family history of unhealthy cycles, trauma, etc. And because that wasn't really seen or addressed, it really impacted my childhood as I was highly sensitive. Now we know I have ADHD. I had a lot of issues in that way. And then when I was about 6 or 7, we ended up joining a church that was really unhealthy.
Mm.
And it became kind of the center of our world. And because I was raised in that environment, it had detrimental effects on my development, my belief system, my health. Um, and so, in general, looking big picture, it wasn't awful in any sense of the word. There were happy moments, loving, caring,
Yeah.
laughter, vacations. It wasn't an abusive situation like that, but it was not healthy and detrimental long term.
Okay. So I like to go back to that area just to cover all the bases. I also like talking about high school years and relationships.
Okay.
Take us to your high school years and any toxic relationships. Were you with a narcissist type of thing?
Okay. So in my high school years, unfortunately, I lived through really unhealthy dynamics because of that church.
Yeah.
And so there was some sexual assault that was through about a 5, 6 year period for me by a family friend.
Mm.
Um, and then because of that culture, dating was not allowed. So there wasn't relationships, but it was more so you find someone and you get married. And
Right.
I ended up finding someone. I was 17. He was 21. Yeah, 21. And we, he talked to my dad and said, I want to marry her.
Mm.
We had never dated. And uh, we got engaged about in a month and a half later. And um, yeah, it was interesting. I married a year after that, and so I was 18 when we got married. It was a very unhealthy beginning,
Mm.
and he came from an unhealthy family dynamic as well, being part of that church.
Did they have
Luckily,
was it that type of church that would have like multiple wives?
no, 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 no.
No.
It
Okay.
was just like fundamentalist Baptist. I don't know if you've heard of the Duggar
Ah,
family. They're on TLC, the Duggar family. They have like 19 kids.
okay.
Anyway, it was the same kind of background as that. The same teacher that they followed, my church followed. His name was Bill
Okay.
Goddard. It was kind of this all about homeschool and shelter your children and morph them into obedient, cheerful, helpful beings, which sounds okay until you recognize the methods at which that happens. Um, so
So there
anyway,
was
yeah,
a lot of suppression, I'm sure. A lot of you can't be your authentic self, stuff like
yes,
that.
yes.
Okay.
And so anyway, he was my only boyfriend, my only relationship. And thankfully, he was not like everyone else. And while we were both very unhealthy at that time and our marriage was very unhealthy, it has grown and we are both in therapy. We've both been in therapy for years. We work really hard at our relationship. It's been really challenging
Mm.
for both of us because of how it started and because we didn't really get to date and find a great match personality wise and interest wise. But we are both dedicated to growing and improving and communicating. And he's been a safe person for me, especially in late years. And it's been a gift considering what could have been and what happened to so many people there in
I'm
that world.
I'm curious if he was also dealing with any mind body symptoms popping up.
Um, Ironically, not significant. He is more of a he's he has effects for sure, but he's
Mhm.
also more learned very young to shut down, shut off. Whereas
Mm.
I was a very big feeler, he was able to really just shut off and compartmentalize and
Yeah.
distance. So we handled it very differently.
Okay. So, all right. So then pregnancy happens and you're bedridden. Let's talk about the perfect storm, some of the symptoms that came up
Mhm.
and what you were feeling, what you were dealing with.
Yeah, sure. So I had already been dealing with some depression, anxiety, um, fatigue, things like that, and POTS symptoms in teen years. But then with the pregnancy, I had hyperemesis gravidarum, which is very intense morning sickness. It's all day long.
Mm.
I couldn't stop vomiting. I couldn't even swallow my own saliva. I had to have a PICC line surgically placed for TPN. Um, it was just a whole thing. And then after she was born, I had a lot of pain, fatigue. My C-section wasn't healing well. And then when she was about, I think she was about 3, 4 months old or so, maybe 5, 6, I started noticing pain in a pinky. That's how it started.
Mm.
And I just noticed this pain in my pinky all the time. And then it started to spread into my next finger, my next finger, my next. And then it started on the other hand, my pinky. And then it just slowly took over my body. And that was my first diagnosis was fibromyalgia.
Mhm. Fibromyalgia. Okay, so I guess dealing with that, what did you think was going on? Or did you think, did you have any answers, or did you go down any rabbit holes?
Yeah, at this point, I had very little experience with the medical world for myself. Up
Mhm.
until pregnancy, I'd never been into a hospital. Like, I'd been into a hospital. I had never personally been hospitalized or in an ER or
Right.
anything like that. Um, and so I just kind of trusted the process, which was, hey, let's check your labs. Oh, your labs look okay. Oh, your ANA is slightly elevated. Let's send you to a rheumatologist.
Right.
Okay, so then we started seeing rheumatologists, and then it was, oh, this is a cluster of symptoms. We call it fibromyalgia. Um, I don't even remember, that was so long ago. I probably tried some medications. I mean, that was probably 14 years ago. I probably tried some medications. My body did not do well with medications. It would react. I usually get all the side effects and none of the benefits. Um, yeah, and it just kind of spiraled from there. It was one symptom after another, and I just kept going back to doctor after doctor, specialist after specialist, neurologists and
Mhm.
rheumatologists and gastroenterologists and all of them. And it just started stacking. I mean, I sent you a list of some of the diagnoses, not all of them, but some of them, and it just kept stacking, stacking, stacking. But I was not getting hope. I was not getting answers as to why the treatments or medications weren't helpful. Um, and nobody could really explain it. I was young, I was healthy, like it didn't make sense.
So how long was that period of limbo? How long were you in like illness limbo for?
Yeah, so uh, like I said, I definitely had POTS and things like that as a teen that was completely missed and undiagnosed. But really, when it became debilitating and really daily was probably, like I said, around 14 years ago. And then I started brain rewiring at the very end of 2021. So into 2022 is where I finally kind of started changing
What
from.
when did it get really intense? Because I know for me, I probably had symptoms for the past 25 years, but my real perfect storm was probably to 2020. So
Mhm.
when was it like when, you know,
That was,
I'm almost counting like 70 to 100 symptoms. When did that all
yeah.
hit you at the worst?
Yeah. It started around when my daughter was around 6 months old. So that would
Okay.
have been 2011, early 2011, probably.
So that's about 10 years that you were suffering.
Yeah.
Shit, that's a long time.
Yes.
So that means your world would have been, staying at home, bedridden, not much of a social life.
We were very isolated also because of my daughter's health. We had to protect her and shelter her so she couldn't get sick. And so we really lost community at that point as well. Not only was I not physically well, but I also had to keep my daughter isolated and safe. And then I started developing very severe depression, major depressive disorder, treatment resistant. And it was a very, very dark season.
Right. So then what happened? How did you get yourself out of this nightmare?
So, um, essentially, we never stopped trying to get help and answers. We
Yeah.
continually were seeing doctors. After the brain rewiring and I started improving, I went through my phone and deleted like 40 doctors out of my phone book, like 40, 45 doctors just out of my phone. Um, I was constantly seeing specialists and doctors. We traveled to the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota. We spent like I feel like it was a month, maybe more there. Um, I traveled to Texas. We lived in Oklahoma at the time. I saw tons of specialists there. Eventually, we ended up moving to California, which is where we live now. Saw lots of specialists here. And ultimately, it was whenever I saw on Instagram,
Hmm.
I saw Sarah Jackson. I don't know if you know her.
Yep.
She's pretty big in this world, but she was sharing her story. And I resonated with some of the things that she was sharing. And I had felt like I was out of hope and out of options because every professional I saw would say, "Hey, I've never seen something like this. This is the worst I've seen. I don't have answers for you anymore." And when I started reading her story and seeing her posts, something in me clicked and I said, "That's me." Like
Mm.
it wasn't the same story, but it felt similar enough that it was like, oh, wait, like this could have something to do with what I'm dealing with.
Yeah.
Trauma, you know, obviously, I mean, I have this daughter who's terminally ill and she's been through all these surgeries, and it's like, it's scary and the future is so unknown. And I'm facing her mortality daily and I'm living with these, pain. And it just started clicking for me. And I saw a neurologist in 2019 who said, "You have what we call functional neurological disorder. You are, completely debilitated by your symptoms, but your brain appears normal on MRIs and scans, which means structurally it's okay, but it's malfiring, like it's malfunctioning. It's sending false signals to your body." And he said it is the hardest neurological condition to treat, and we call it disease of the soul. And I remember I burst into tears in his office and I just began sobbing because I just knew at that moment that was because I had been carrying so much pain and trauma and
Mm.
grief alone. And it was too much for me to bear. And the pain was just inexplainable. And I knew at that moment I wanted to give everything I had to healing my
Hmm.
nervous system and my brain because I felt in my gut and in my soul that I finally had the answer, that this is what I needed.
So then, did you take a courses? Did you go down the path of the mind body space? What was it, some of the programs that you might have taken or that you took?
Yes. So I started with DNRS because that's what Sarah Jackson had done, and that's the only one I knew of. I didn't know of any others.
Yeah.
I was off all social media, all chronic illness, everything during that. And I
Good.
did that for a year straight
Good.
up,
Good. Good.
followed the program. So for 3 months or 4 months, I did that. And then I joined Restore because Sarah opened Restore at that time. She
Hmm.
had started hers. And at the time, she had opened it as a resource to add alongside of a brain rewiring program. It was not a standalone. And
Hmm.
so I was doing DNRS and Restore, and I did that. And I had dedicated to a year, regardless
Hmm.
of the ups and downs, regardless of if it was working or not. And it was the best decision I ever made because it changed my whole world.
So during the journey, did you have setbacks? Did you tell us a bit of like a somewhat of your routine, like on a
Mhm.
Tuesday in the middle of your journey, the middle, because I know the
Middle.
beginning and the end's different. So
Yeah.
kind of like the average day.
Yeah, when I did DNRS, I was still pretty bedridden. At the beginning, I was completely still bedridden, but I would uh, get up, do my morning routine, go to the bathroom, brush my teeth, brush my hair, come back to bed. And I started implementing the DNRS steps. So I would do incremental training, they call it. So I would
Hmm.
maybe like stand a little longer before I got back in bed. And then I would tell my brain, hey, stop with this, stop the high heart rate or the pain or the weakness. You're okay. This is false. There's no reason you're in danger to stand. You're capable of standing. And then I would do a round of a memory and a visualization after I would sit back down. I would sit back down and lay back down, do a round. And I did 4 rounds a day, tried to total 45 minutes to an hour a day. And I just all day, every day, I was redirecting each thought trying not to talk about any symptoms, trying to not think about them. And like everything was centered around this. So I was daily looking for glimmers. I would take pictures every day of glimmers. I
Hmm.
would fake laugh every day. I would fake smile. Um, I just poured myself into it. It was my priority that year.
Right. So did you notice symptoms started to lift one at a time? Physical symptoms?
Yes, actually, I started noticing first thought shifts. My first symptoms to shift were some thoughts. Like I would have a thought and I'd be like, that's new. That's surprisingly optimistic. And then I began to notice physical symptoms dissipating, specifically POTS first. Um, and then uh, yeah, probably about 3 or 4 months in, I went from having to be carried upstairs, use a wheelchair, stay in bed, to using compression garments and being able to walk through an airport
Right.
and
That's amazing.
fly. Yeah. I had gone from I had only flown once in all of my sick years, and I, blacked out on the plane multiple times. I had, I was very, very dizzy for like 3 days after the flight. I was struggling. And this time I was only about 3 or 4 months into the DNRS program, and I was able to walk through the airport with my compression garments as my support, not a wheelchair or a walker.
Mhm.
And I did not black out once on the plane, and I did not deal with any dizziness afterwards. I was doing rounds the whole time I was on the plane,
Mhm.
memories, visualizations, creating that felt safety in my body. So I started noticing those improvements. And then I would say by month 13. So I finished my year, and
Mhm.
I actually, the last probably 3 months or so, I really was burned out. I was super burned out. I was overdoing it because I
Mhm.
was stubborn, and I was like, I'm going to do it the best perfection. I really just had the mindset of fixing, sticking with it, whatever the
Mhm.
cost, which I don't encourage now.
Mhm.
But it was month 13 when I finally had the freedom to go, I finished the year. Now I
Mhm.
can just let my body lead, support my body in what it needs. That I saw a huge spike of improvement. So, month 13, I finally remember waking up one morning and feeling happy
Mhm.
and feeling gratitude that I woke up. And I remember thinking, I don't know the last time I felt this way,
Right.
um, because the depression was just so crushing that I almost didn't survive it. And that's when I knew that I had finally really healed, and that this was this was everything that I had been needing all along, was just safety and love and understanding, um, and belief in myself.
Yeah, when you get that little glimmer of evidence, that keeps you going on the
Yeah.
path. Because in the
Yes.
beginning, you're surrounded by constant, like your body's lying to you, everything's lying to you, Google people, your symptoms. So then you're doing this work, you might not believe it in the
Mhm.
beginning because you're overwhelmed. You've tried everything, obviously. Doubt is really a big enforcer here. And then eventually you get some evidence. And then you ride that evidence. You keep going and going and going. And then you believe it. You finally believe it, right? And but how did you deal with the days where you had the setbacks? Because I'm sure you had plenty. And how did you deal with the doubt that came up?
Yes. So, I mean, for sure, it happened, especially in the beginning. And like you said, there's something super powerful about experiencing for yourself those shifts. In the
Hmm.
beginning, you are just completely relying on other people's hope, other people's stories.
Yeah,
Um, for me, it was the dedication to the year
yeah,
to say, hey, I really didn't believe it would work for me in the beginning. I started it because I had hope that it was going to work because of that appointment with the neurologist. And nothing else had worked. And hope is scary. Hope is
yeah,
painful and scary when you've been let down for a decade over and over again with everything you've tried. And so when I would get setbacks and overwhelm, I would just go through the motions. I didn't feel it. It wasn't genuine. I would fake smile. And I tell people all the time, sometimes it was a matter of just pulling my lips back it was not a smile. It was just a like
Yeah.
it's not even kind of a fake smile. It's just pulling my lips back because I was stubborn enough that I was like, I'm going to do the program just to prove that it doesn't work. But I gave it my all because if I don't give it my all, I will regret it and I will
Yeah.
never know. And I need to know. And so in those hard days, that's what I did. Sometimes I would do my rounds and they would be like 5 minutes. And I was
Mm.
aiming for 15, 20 minutes. And I'm like, that's it. That's all I had in me. But I always say that you show up with your best every day, and that's enough because that is 100%. It's going to look different from day to day, and that's okay. But just show up with your best capacity each day, and that's enough because it doesn't require perfection. And thank goodness, because none of us are perfect at it.
Right. Um, so this was a year, 13 months, and what was after that? Did you keep implementing other methods, or did you change certain things, or were you done, or what happened next?
Yeah, I continued with consistency in supporting my body and brain, but it did shift. It was definitely no longer a checklist. Every day I have to do 4 rounds a day. I would go days without doing any rounds. Some days I would just do one, some days I would do two. But really, I began to shift away a little more away from the DNRS method and more into Restore's method because I began to learn the importance of the whole body and not just focusing on the limbic system, but also as you begin to heal, layers start coming off and
Mhm.
deeper wounds and trauma starts to surface its head and says, hey, this needs to be felt. This needs to be processed. This wants to be heard. And I began to really experience more anger,
Yeah.
more grief. I went through what I call a teenage anger phase because I never got to experience that in the uh, world that I grew up in. You didn't really get to experience the typical normal developmental phases. I never got to express anger or feel anger. It
Mm.
was bad. It was repressed. It was, sinful. And so I really went through a phase where I just felt so much anger, so much grief. And I just met myself with a lot of somatic practices, a lot of love. I learned to love myself for truly the first time in my life. I went
So
from,
you're feeling now. You're feeling the
yes,
feelings.
yes,
Well, there is a difference here compared to the DNRS world, where
yes.
it's redirect.
Hmm.
It's this is where I had the problems.
Hmm.
DNRS was great in the beginning, but
Hmm.
eventually my physical symptoms they cleared, but they started to move up, and I started having mental symptoms. OCD,
Hmm.
looping thoughts went skyrocketed. What else was there? I had phobias, post-traumatic stress, intrusive thoughts. Anxiety went up to like 1,000 when before it was just shitty. Now it's like constant hell. And this is where I had to jump ship. That's why I was wondering. I'm like,
Hmm.
I'm surprised. Did she also face that? I'm wondering, did you also notice that?
I noticed that the emotions for me surfaced and uh, some anxiety got more intense just because the world felt very shaky. Suddenly,
Mhm.
the foundation of everything I built my life on was unstable. And so that happened. I didn't experience more like depression and things like that. That actually radically improved.
Mhm.
But it was just so much of all the suppressed emotions
Mhm.
surface that I needed. And I started working again with a therapist, which I had paused during my year of
Right.
focusing on DNRS. Um, and I really began to process a lot of that and leaned heavily into more of the gentle attunement approach that Restore takes with Sarah Jackson about like, hey, feel your emotions, meet your body where it's at, love yourself. It's okay to feel things. And I really started to veer away from the DNRS like protocol. It was helpful in the beginning.
Mhm.
But long term, I don't think it serves people very well because there's a reason you ended up with all of those symptoms, and
Yeah.
the
Well,
body
you
needs
started doing
to
the
process.
somatic tracking, which is now you're feeling the feelings, you're allowing them compared to stop, stop, stop,
Exactly.
ignore, distract,
Mhm.
redirect. So now you're ready. So you made the call, which is great. You made the call to go, okay, this has been great, but now I need to start to allow, I need to start to feel and do the tracking. And I
Mhm.
think that was the probably the missing piece. And the emotions could finally come up and be heard.
Yes. Yep.
That's amazing.
Mhm.
Yeah, I've noticed that in this field. That's the missing piece that people are missing with the brain retraining because it seems like they ignore the big OCD emotional elephant in the room, and that's the missing piece that I've seen with many people. That and I was waiting to see. I'm like, this is weird. She's not like no 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 no. There just must have been some sort of shift. So I was waiting for it. And I'm like, yeah, we got her. Okay, good.
Yeah.
So thanks um, for that because I think a lot of people will be like, okay, yeah, there is a pattern. I do see it. It makes sense, right? It supports itself. You start feeling the emotions. You're getting, you're starting to bring down your allostatic load slowly,
Yeah.
right? You're starting to bring your survival state down. Things are shifting, and um, it comes to a point where you become your own guide, and it becomes like a lifestyle, not so much a program anymore. It's
Mhm.
more like a lifestyle because life will keep throwing you curveballs, which I'm sure you know all about.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah, of course. So did this, journey, are you still doing some of the methods? Are you still, tracking and continuing?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, it's become a daily kind of habit, lifestyle. I tell people that in the beginning, it feels like a burden and everything is hard, everything is intentional, everything is opposite of your body's natural instinct or your brain's natural instinct. But over time, eventually, it becomes a blessing. Like it's not a burden anymore. Now I feel capable and equipped because life has continued to throw curveballs. My daughter is still sick. We are still seeing doctors. She is still having continuous surgeries. I've been dealing with a lot of issues from my past, relational struggles. It's
Yep.
been difficult and painful and emotional. But now I know, hey, I can curl up in a ball in the fetal position and just hold myself and say, you're okay because you're strong and you're capable. And this does suck and it is unfair, but it's not forever. And you're doing it. And I'm so proud of you. I get to speak to myself in the way that I would speak to my daughter or the way that I wish someone had spoken
Yep.
to myself. And then I can move into a beautiful memory or visualization and just give myself a break from the real world and say, hey, I know that this is real and it's important and it matters. And let's take a moment. Let's take 5 minutes. Let's take 10 minutes and just escape to some beautiful retreat somewhere with big, beautiful trees and green grass and luscious sunshine and just sit and rest because it's okay. You can lay your armor down for a moment. It's not going to change the situation, but it is a way to show up for yourself and to love you. And I think that that's kind of how I integrate it now is if I'm feeling a little anxious, I might, oh my goodness, I'll rest my shoulders. I'll give myself a containment hug. I'll open up my field of vision and I'll just be like, you're doing it. You're okay. I'll give myself a few words of encouragement. It's really just changed how I live. It's not so much a scheduled practice time set aside anymore. I think that is important in the beginning, but
Yeah.
long term, that's not how I do it anymore.
I think what you've going through this has taught you how to move with it. And when something comes up, sure, your survival state goes up a bit. Symptoms might pop up, but you're able to move through it and get back down to zero, where you're able to handle more of what life throws at you. Compared to before, we were stuck. We weren't moving through our emotions or whatever it was, and we were chronically stuck, and then symptoms piled up. Right now, you're able to move through it,
Yes.
right, and find that state of homeostasis. So, are you recovered? Are the symptoms gone?
The symptoms are not gone altogether.
Right.
Many of them are radically improved. All
Yeah.
of them are improved. And
Yeah.
I go through phases where I feel pretty much symptom free. But when life feels extra stressful because the body does speak the language of sensation,
Hmm.
it's I mean, it's hardwired in there. It's been a decade of my life, how it communicated, how it wanted to help me, how it wanted to protect me. And I do have some, genetic things that I feel like are amplified. in times of
Hmm.
stress or overwhelm. And I just, at that time, I notice I don't panic, I don't freak out. I just go, oh, ha, there you are again, trying to protect me. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for using your voice. And I'm going to give you some additional support because I know, hey, this is information. I take that information, I say, what in my life can I cut back on? Where can I
Right.
allow myself more rest? Where can I add in support? And so I think that I mean, I think that the term healed, recovered is a little tricky. Some people use it freely, and that's fine. I hesitate because I'm thinking, I don't know that people are ever without symptoms because we are continually, at least to some level, like even a healthy person who's never been chronically ill will
Hmm.
get a headache or maybe tension if they're overly stressed at work or whatever it may be. And so I think the body speaks the language of sensation, but I think that the true test is, hey, are you able to live your life? Are you able to understand that a symptom is not necessarily chronic illness as much as it's, hey, trying to get your attention and that's the way it communicates. So then just support your body. So that's kind of how I see it. But my lifestyle has radically shifted and improved. And the symptoms, every single symptom has improved, and some don't bother me at all or rarely.
Yeah, that's how I view it. I think of there's more to it than just the symptoms. I think it's, the symptoms are an alarm
Mhm.
to get your attention to, the perceived danger that's around you. And it's up to you if it's just there to serve you. It's up to you if you want to listen and do something about it and, find that balance compared to what we used to be when we were stuck. So,
Yes.
and I'm grateful for these alarms because I can move with them. And they're telling me things like, "Hey, do you think you should be hanging with that person? They're just stressing you out. They're not good for you. They're toxic. Thanks for letting me know. You know what? I've been, watching the news too much or doing this too much or whatever." Right. So because of that, I'm able to, my body, my brain communicating with me. I can make the changes that are necessary so that I don't fall into an old cycle. Right. And same thing with recovery. Recovery. Technically, recovery is that you can live your life fully, even while
Mhm.
having symptoms.
Right.
It doesn't mean that all the symptoms are gone. It just
Right.
means that you're at a stage where you can live life and you're not, the symptoms aren't holding you down for whatever reason. But for me, also, it's a reminder of I don't want to be the guy that was at the stage where I was before I was sick. I don't want to be, at that place again where, yeah, sure, I was living life somewhat, but I was, you know, uh, my the way I was handling things, the way my personality, even some of the things that I was doing. I don't want to be that old person anymore. I want to be, this journey's forced me to be the best person that I can be.
Mhm.
I'm a different person altogether.
Absolutely.
Have you noticed that?
Oh my goodness, yes. And I talk about it a lot because I said this work literally touches every part of your life. There's not a part of my life that hasn't been touched by this work. And I say to people, you're not healing to go back to the person you were. You're really healing to become the person you were always meant to be because it really is, it's transformative work in every sense of the word.
Oh, for sure. Did you find yourself being more, I know you came from a strict religious background, but did you find yourself more in tune with your spiritual side or whatever it may be?
It's been a been a transformative experience with my faith,
Hmm.
and I'm still on it. So
Yeah.
I would say that there has been a crumbling of what I originally held to be true,
Yeah.
and now I'm in the phase of really, for the first time, building an authentic and true faith that is mine. And it is still a journey and a process. But absolutely, this work has affected it and impacted it.
It must have impacted a lot of your core beliefs throughout your life, which for me, the core beliefs, I call them core alarms. Um, you become a slave to them. And it's like compared to somebody who had all their alarms turned off, living a life compared to somebody who had all these alarms, right? You lived a drastically different life, person A, person B, right? When you start to turn off these alarms and they're not affecting your beliefs so much, and then you get to create your own beliefs where,
Mhm.
whether what you can do, where you can go, you go, what do we want to do? I'm not being, a slave to my anxiety. I'm not a slave to my symptoms. I can be my authentic self now. It's like you've never discovered this ever before. So you're almost like a reborn. It's
Yeah,
like you're reborn. It's like, well, what do I like? I don't even know what I like. Well, let's find out.
absolutely. I mean, you've lived in survival mode for so long. You've forgotten what it means to live life and what it means to find joy and everything, the lens at which you view every life aspect has changed. And that does include your faith and your spirituality. And yeah, it's incredible. The transformation, it is a different person. It really is.
Oh, for sure. Like there's some music I don't even listen to anymore that I grew up on, right?
Mhm.
Or liked for 20 years. Now I'm like, I like chill music. I just like it. So chill, right?
You know what's interesting? I have really enjoyed more heavy metal in this season. I never once listened to it growing up, never once listened to it, never enjoyed it as an adult.
Mhm.
And the anger phase that I went through, my husband was
Yeah.
like, there's a band called Skillet. You might like their music is like feelings and it's heavy. And when I tell you, I that is my jam when I'm angry, and I will sit there and I will
Yeah.
start doing some somatic practices that are just, pushing on a wall, punching the air, really
Yeah.
using those emotions and getting them out. And it has been powerful. Do not underestimate the power of music in your
Oh,
healing.
yeah.
And if
Well,
you
that's what I used
want
to love.
calm,
I
yeah,
used to love
okay.
metal, Korn, Deftones, Tool, Gojira. Like that's all I for like 20 years. That's all I listened to was metal, metal, metal. And I grew up on the Beatles, Nirvana. And then I transitioned to Korn. Like that's all. I did. I partied, drank. We listened to metal. I was in a metal band,
Yeah,
right? And then after a while, I was like, I'm done with it. I'm done with the
yeah,
scene. It's the
yeah,
same old, and it's always right. I was like,
yeah,
now I'm into reggae music.
yeah.
I'm into 70s groove. Listen to a
Mhm.
little bit of Doors,
Right.
calming, Riders on the Storm, like, right?
Yeah.
Because
I
of
think
all
it's
the years of chaos, I think that's why.
For sure. And I think it's an indicator of where your nervous system is at. And I think
Yeah.
that when there's music that's beautiful for grief, and there's music that's like happy and lifts your spirit. And had just never tapped into anger ever. I
Yeah.
had never
Yeah.
felt it my entire life. And so now I'm giving it a safe space. And I'm very mindful of the music that I choose, that it can be deep and feeling and heavy, but not depressing or bringing me down in a negative way, but more or less just freely
Therapeutic.
opening up therapeutically in a way that lets me express and allow anger for the first time, because that's so healthy. And so it's just interesting though that we're in that as you've been healing, you're kind of moving into the soothing music. And
Yeah.
as I'm feeling, I'm like, hey, let's also bring in some of this anger because it is all of it, right? We do want a full range of emotions and feelings. That's what it's about. It's not about always being regulated and always being calm. It's about being able to have a flexible nervous system where you can move in and out of all of the states in a healthy way. And so it's actually kind of fun and exciting for me to get to experience anger. I don't know if fun would be the right word, but it's healthy and it's good and it's
Mhm.
interesting to experience anger.
Yeah. I think we're here to not try to be, too enlightened. We're here to experience some textures in this 3D world. Um, and then when we go to the next side, then we can be perfect out there. So for me, once in a while, I got to listen to a double kick pedal or, a heavy guitar riff because it's just, there's nothing that cuts it like that heavy music sometimes. But then I'll ease back into the Doors. But if you were to give somebody advice who, was in your shoes, that's in your shoes, or dealing with all these symptoms and they're finding this video for the first time, they're thinking about mind body, what advice would you give them?
Wow. I Well, first, before I would give them any advice, I would just want to give them a really big hug and say that you're not alone and there's so much hope for you. But as far as advice, I would say, um, be open to the possibility that healing is available for you and
Mhm.
that it's okay if it's messy and it's a long process. So prepare for a marathon, not a sprint. Find a community to walk alongside of you as you heal because doing it alone is really difficult. And know that there's ups and downs, but what feels like forward and backward motion is really just up and down forward motion.
Mhm.
So dedicate to the long haul. Give yourself grace, not perfection. But it does take consistency. I always say consistency, yes, perfection, no. And then I would say the most important piece that a lot of the programs don't really talk about is the compassion and love that you use when you speak to yourself.
Mhm.
Your voice is what you're going to hear more than any other voice, your entire world, your entire life. And so speak to yourself like you would a dear friend or a child and show up with encouragement and compassion and grace. Uh, and that I think will transform your journey.
Awesome. I'm going to put all the symptoms in the description. So people, I encourage you to go through them all and understand that, you don't, because some people are like, I'm a special case. You're not a special case. You can recover. If you're able to heal most of these symptoms, I'm able to fully recover. And there's many people that are able to fully recover, and they were dealing with a shitload of symptoms, just like you. You can do it too. So thank you for being here and sharing your
Thank you so much
message.
for having me.